Eugenics is or was a movement to improve humanity through essentially selective breeding, through preventing or discouraging those with supposed bad genes from reproducing and trying to produce more people with supposed good genes. It started out in Victorian England in the 1800s and reached its heyday in the 1920s and 30s. And it played a very major role in the creation of, development of modern statistics that is widely used today in almost every field and throughout the world. Eugenics started out and was deeply associated with the Darwin-Wedgewood Clan. The Darwin-Wedgewood Clan was the extended family of Charles Darwin, who is usually credited with discovering and inventing the theory of evolution. The Darwin-Wedgewood family was a very wealthy, powerful, politically connected family in Victorian England. Many of the members of the family were prominent in many different fields. Two members played a very large role in the formation of eugenics and the development of modern statistics. Francis Galton was Darwin's cousin, and in 1869 he wrote a famous book called Hereditary Genius, in which he pointed to his own family and other people in his social circle who were very successful and were the children of other successful people and the grandchildren of other successful people, and argued that genius was hereditary, was based on your genes, on genetics. This book got a lot of pushback from people who said, well, wait a minute, your family, these people you know, they're very wealthy, they're very well connected, they go to the, quote, right schools like Eton and Harrow's in England, the top, essentially, prep schools in U.S. terminology. They're wealthy, they have tutors, they have all these advantages. So it's about environment and not genetics, and they challenged the scientific basis of his thesis. And this led Galton to not just investigate statistics, but to fund, finance, and back extensive research and development of statistical methods to prove in a scientific way and to put his ideas on a scientific basis that, in fact, genetics was determining success, determining genius, responsible for scientific inventions. And he began to advocate the notion of eugenics, of actually breeding better people who often seemed like his family or his social circle, the elite in Victorian England. He, in particular, financed and backed Karl Pearson, one of the key figures in the modern statistics field. Leonard Darwin was the son of Charles Darwin. He was a major backer of eugenics. He, in particular, was close to, a mentor of, and financial backer of Ronald Fisher, who is responsible for the preponderance of these methods, statistical methods. The sort of titan of the modern statistics movement was Ronald Elmer Fisher. Galton and Darwin, Leonard Darwin, and other members of the Darwin-Wedgewood Clan, as well as other members of the British elite, financed the eugenics movement, which heavily overlapped modern statistics, and they financed people like Karl Pearson and Ronald Fisher to conduct research and develop methods to prove that eugenics was scientific, and it was accepted by many, many scientists as scientific in those days. Karl Pearson received all sorts of support from Francis Galton, who eventually gave his, when he passed away, he gave his money to Karl Pearson to develop statistical methodologies at University College at London. Ronald Fisher was a younger generation. He met Leonard Darwin at Cambridge around 1912, 1913, the time period of the picture I'm showing. He was a very bright man, very creative, by many accounts a very difficult person to deal with. He had a bad temper. His daughter is on camera saying he tolerated fools very poorly. He was really the driving force in the 1920s and 30s in the development of many modern statistical methods that are now widely used all over the world in all sorts of fields. He and Pearson got into a big fight, and there was a big feud between Fisher and many of the other colleagues he had in the statistics in the 1920s and 30s. The 1920s and 30s were the heyday of eugenics. There were compulsory sterilization laws in many states in the United States, including California, where I'm located. Similar laws were passed in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scandinavian countries. Many famous Fabian socialists like George Bernard Shaw were adherents of eugenics. Eugenics is often presented today as a fringe, pseudoscientific, right-wing nut group almost. However, it had broad appeal, and its appeal crossed the political spectrum of the time of the 1920s and 30s. It was very mainstream and accepted by many prominent politicians, figures like George Bernard Shaw or H.G. Wells. And it spread into Germany and, in particular, influenced Nazism. It began to run into some trouble with the Depression, but it faltered and crashed and burned after World War II with the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Nazi atrocities, the death camps, the Nuremberg trials. These basically discredited eugenics in the public mind among most people. Scientists, statisticians began to quickly distance themselves from eugenics. The name was dropped. Many organizations that were involved in eugenics societies, closed. They changed their names. They mutated into modern organizations like Planned Parenthood or the World Population Council. They started to talk about population control or reproductive health or other causes that didn't carry the stigma of eugenics. And eugenics became almost anathema. It's a word that's almost always used in a negative way today, in the same way that appeasement shifted its meaning in World War II from basically negotiating or talking to people, trying to work things out with people, to craven cowardice, to a very negative terminology. Eugenics essentially died. At least very few people will admit publicly that they believe in it. There's selective outrage historically over the involvement, specifically of statisticians, but also some other people, with eugenics. Ronald Fisher was deeply, deeply hated by many of his colleagues. There was a bitter feud between him and Karl Pearson, Karl Pearson's son Egon Pearson, many other people, many students of those people. He is hated by people even to this day, although I don't think anyone's left alive who knew him. His enthusiasm for eugenics is frequently emphasized to this day, often as if he was a unique aberration in the field of statistics. In fact, nearly all the original statisticians who were financed by the eugenics movement were advocates of or adherents of eugenics, as were many prominent scientists and many people from different political backgrounds. So there were left-wing eugenics fanatics or followers, and there were right-wing, and there were people who simply hard to categorize according to left and right. After World War II, everyone, like the famous saying, success has 1,000 followers and failure is an orphan. No one wants to be associated with eugenics to the present day. But Fisher was not particularly unusual in this. He was one of many adherents of eugenics in his time in the 1920s and 30s. What is the legacy of this eugenics background? Eugenics' role in statistics is generally downplayed, although it's well documented. It's no mystery. The statistical methods developed by Fisher and his colleagues are widely used everywhere in all sorts of fields, including genetics, agriculture, political science, economics, social sciences, all the way into hard sciences such as physics and astronomy. And I worked with maximum likelihood method and some of Fisher's methods when I was a graduate student. They're very common. Many people who use them don't really know their origins or vaguely aware of the names like Fisher or Pearson that turn up in the statistical literature. These methods were used to produce seemingly scientific arguments for eugenics and evidence for eugenics and so forth back in the 1920s and 30s and in the earlier part of the previous century. They, in practice, seem flexible. One can get the results one wants. We see these methods being used by everyone in modern scientific and political controversies such as climate change, the current coronavirus crisis, which is very politicized, drug and vaccine safety, and many other examples. You can usually get the results you want or expect from these methods. The reasons for that are probably multiple reasons and weaknesses in the techniques that they developed that were not addressed, in part because they were trying to prove that eugenics was true, even though that may not be the case. Those problems include that the methods don't really adequately deal with how you select and define the data. So there's a lot of freedom to fiddle around with the actual data and produce the results you want. They don't include estimates of the effect of this flexibility in the selection and definition of data. Similarly, one can select an infinity of mathematical models for your data. There's a lot of freedom. We don't generally have a good way of handling the effects of that freedom. In fact, you can prove anything with an arbitrarily, exceedingly complicated mathematical model, completely contrary to your common sense interpretation of the data, or probably what's in fact reasonable. So hidden within these very sophisticated techniques, there are a variety of assumptions, there are a variety of aspects of them which make them prone to manipulation. It would be unfair to say that the statisticians were unaware of these, particularly Fisher. It would be unfair to say that they weren't trying to fix them in theory, but our legacy are methods that were developed with a political agenda to prove eugenics. And they are similarly politically useful today and have the same, I do not think, the problems that were visible in Fisher's time of this ability to get the result you want have truly been fixed today. So that's the legacy of the eugenics movement and modern statistics. As we become more dependent on data and computers and statistics, it's important both to recognize those historical problems and find some sort of solution to them that allows us to move beyond our prejudices, something that's always been very hard to do, but move beyond our prejudices and overcome the weaknesses of these methods. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising-beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.